Wraith of Injustice by Sarah J. Nilsson. This is the true story surrounding the death of Heidi Sue Dowland, born November 18, 1980, and tragically killed in a plane crash on January 13, 2019. Wraith of Injustice portrays the haunting and destructive consequences of injustice in the aftermath of the death of Heidi Sue Dowland. Episode 5 Wreckage Speaks Volumes.
You're about to hear from Cary Grant, who's a professor here at Embry-Riddle. As you can see, he's also a retired airline pilot, among other things. Cary is also a flight instructor, and in his spare time, just like myself, he volunteers at the FAA safety team out of the Scottsdale FSDO. Cary also holds 2 ground instructor ratings and his remote pilot certificate. And this tri-pacer is Cary's. It is a 1957 model, unlike the crashed aircraft, which was a 1958 model, and it's a tailwheel aircraft instead of a tricycle gear. But the similarities were such that Cary has important insight to share about this crash. And as you can see, Piper 7301 Delta is duly registered to Cary Grant.
Thank you, Sarah, for allowing me to comment on some of these pictures. And as I was looking through them, some differences started to highlight themselves, pop out, that I was viewing at. As Sarah said, I have my airplane down in Deer Valley, and it's a 57, but it's a fabric-covered airplane. And I noticed the accident airplane with all the crinkles and scrape marks told me this was a metal-covered airplane, which is very unusual for the PA-22s. This is a great view of the aircraft that came down on its right side. And what really stands out on this picture, besides all the damage along the right side of the fuselage, is looking at the prop. You can see the bottom prop is deformed and scraped, but not as much as you'd expect it to be if it was turning. So the fact that the top blade is undamaged and only the bottom blade is damaged, and the damage along the nose cone and the engine tells me that prop was pretty stationary at the time of impact. Left side of the airplane was relatively unscathed, whereas the right side, where it came down, took the blunt of the trauma. And this view from the head of the airplane looking back into the cockpit shows how the passenger would really have taken most of the trauma from hitting the airplane on the ground. So there's a lot of deformation there. And that's also a good view of the prop, again showing that the bottom prop has the scrape marks, whereas the top prop just escaped having any damage to it. Another indication that the engine was not turning at the time of impact. This is a good view of looking in the cockpit of both airplanes. And what you can see from this view on the right in my airplane is that the front seats are a lot lower than the seats in the accident airplanes. The seats in the accident airplane are not the original seats. They didn't have that high back to it. Looking in the cockpit on the right, you can also see into the back seat area, and that is not visible in the accident airplane. The back seat was not there, and this is a good view also of the lap belts and how they attach up at the ceiling and down to the 4-point connection system. This is looking into the passenger, the front seat compartment. You have to get in from the right side of the airplane, whether you're a passenger or the pilot. So the pilot has to climb in first, and the passenger follows. Good view of the seat belts and the shoulder harnesses, how they attach. One of the things I noticed is on the accident airplane with the passengers' shoulder harnesses, the left strap fastener is bent where it inserts into the metal, through the metal tab that goes into the buckle and the flap. So there was some obvious stress put on that shoulder harness, whether that was done at the time of the accident or afterwards. But you can see that it's not straight, just about down at the bottom left of the corner, whereas the pilot's buckles look fairly pristine and intact. Right side of the airplane here with the front door missing in this picture. You can see it closed on my airplane on the right side. The seatbelt is hanging out, and it's hard to tell from this picture whether there's any deformation. This would have been the passenger's seatbelt metal tab that the shoulder harnesses would have attached to. And I can't see any damage on that. Just behind the passenger door is the baggage compartment door, and that has a little bit of breakage in the seam there. You can just see it bulging a little bit, but the baggage door stayed closed, and then you can see all the damage back along the fuselage to the elevator and the top of the rudder. Nice view here on the left side of the airplane looking into the passenger compartment in the back of the airplane. And you'll notice on the right side of my airplane, the back seat is there, and on the accident airplane, the back seat is not there. You can see all the way back into the baggage area. That's unusual to have the back seat missing completely. This picture takes a little bit of explaining what you're looking at. On the left side, of course, is the accident airplane. And it's a little bit confusing because what we're seeing is the rear door that the recovery team has opened all the way against the fuselage. So you can see that it should close against the opening there, and the outline of the door fits the opening in the fuselage. The gear is folded up against the door by the recovery team, and it doesn't have the tire on it. You can actually see the axle just out in front of the door, and it looks to me like the gear legs may have been fabric covered because they don't have the scrapes and the tears that the metal has. On the right side, I've included these pictures to show you how the rear seat area looks, and I was performing my annual, so all the floorboards were up looking underneath there, so you can see the sling that forms the rear seat, and I have the rear seat out sitting on the floor there with the cushion and the support bar that supports that seat sitting down there on the ground. So without the rear seat in, there's quite a bit of space back there for cargo or bags or whatever else you want to throw in there. So in the accident airplane, that would have opened up a lot of space for carrying items. Here we're looking inside the cockpit from the back seat area. One of the things I noticed where I have my radio stack, there were no similar type radios, although there is the transponder and the radio at the bottom. But that left a large area on top that appears to have some sort of device bracket, such as a GPS. So I'm wondering, where is that GPS? And they were flying out to some dirt strips up in Mojave County. I'm sure they were using some sort of GPS to navigate their way back and forth. So that's a question I had. The other thing you can see from this picture, comparing the two views of the cockpit, you can obviously see the deformation the right yoke took. It's bent forward and down towards the right in this view.
And indeed, Carrie, in this picture of the aircraft about the time of October 30th of 2018, when it was sold to Heidi Dowland, there is indeed a GPS mounted up there.
We have a zoomed in view of the magneto switch position here. And what immediately caught my eye on the accident airplane on the left is that the switch is in the both position. The Accident Investigation Board mentioned that it was in the both position and the key was not there. They could not find the key. So that means that they were flying this airplane essentially with the mags hot all the time. The Pacer has a unique way of starting engines. You put the key in, and all you're doing is you are turning on the mags, either the right mag, left mag, or both. You actually start the airplane with a starter button that's underneath the pilot's seat. On my airplane, you can see that the key can only be removed in the off position. There's a NTSB alert for operators that specifically warns about this incident, that you should not be able to take the key out in any position other than the off position. And if you can, the switch is defective and needs to be replaced. This was a result, the alert was a result of an accident where the gentleman was moving the prop and the key was in his pocket, and the prop went off and it ended up being a fatal accident, and the switch was not in the off position, it was in the right position. So this is a critical area, and it shows some pattern of flying the airplane in less than an airworthy condition. This is the engine tachometer, and it shows the needle at the 0 position. If the engine had been turning at the time of impact, there should have been a witness mark and even froze the needle at the position at which it was indicating the RPM. So the fact that the needle is at 0 RPM here is another indication that the engine was not turning at the time of impact. We're looking up underneath the instrument panel here at the control yokes and the bicycle chain that goes across the sprocket. On the left side arrow is a U-channel, and that U-channel should be completely straight. It serves as a guide for the yokes coming in and out. You can see it's bent to the right at just about a 40 to 45 degree angle. The second arrow at the top of the T shows a stress bend in the crossbar there. This the sprockets and the chains. So the right yoke was the one that was bent down and to the right, and it transferred that stress into the T-bar here. And it's obvious signs that there was a lot of stress on there. That's a fairly heavy gauge circular tube on there, so there was a lot of stress on that. The Pacer fuel selector valve is on the left sidewall by the pilot's left knee. It only has 3 positions, so you can put it in left, right at the top, and then if you move it over towards the 9 o'clock to the 6 o'clock position, that's the off position. You can only move it counterclockwise. You cannot move this in a clockwise position. So when it hits that off position at the 6 o'clock, you have to move it back towards 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, or the 3 o'clock position. There is no both position on these Pacers. There's a MAL STC that a lot of pilots will do. The seaplane version of this came with that because it adds a left door, but the stock Pacer only had that 3 position, left, right, and off. So you cannot feed the engine from both tanks simultaneously. This view shows the fuel selector valve with the sidewall covering removed, and you can see the insulation underneath. And what's interesting with this view is you can see that this airplane at one time was blue, because the blue paint is still back there on that original insulation running from the fuel lines back there. Just an interesting side note. I also noticed several of the scrape marks. You could see some blue paint coming through on the outside of the fuselage, and this was just confirmation that the airplane at one time had been painted this blue, and that was a common blue for many of the tri-pacers Piper offered. The accident investigation team here has isolated the fuel selector valve. From the sidewall, they've taken it out, removed the lines. You can see the plate. This is looking edge on with the handle attached to the right side, and that the handle is in the left position. It's not quite in the full detent, and they're showing the inside of the selector valve is not quite open all the way. There's supposed to be real noticeable crisp detents in each position as you move this handle. That's one of the inspection items on the annual. The board commented that the selector valve did move in all the proper positions, but that it was very stiff and difficult to move. The accident team report mentions that the flaps were down. However, the photograph of the cockpit on the left side does not substantiate that statement. The flap handle is shown in the up, fully extended position. Pictures on my airplane on the right shows where the flap handle is in the down position. It's all the way almost to the floor, and then in the full extended position, it's up as it would be in the accident airplane on the left side. So I think that's a discrepancy in the report. And I've got the next slide will show why I think that as well, substantiating that statement. This is the left wing. The right wing is at the top of the picture there, and it was pretty well accordioned in and hard to determine anything from the damage. But on the left wing, the wing is upside down here. You can see the lift struts in the front. The arrow is pointing to the flap, which is in the down position. And the description of the wing actually says the flap was down in the overextended position. When you put the flaps down, they lock into place. So the only way you could get it down into the overextended position is if the flaps were extended at the time of impact. We have the accident airplane wings on the left, both the left and right wing showing there on the left side of the picture here. They're supposed to be placarded with the type of fuel that goes in and the quantity. You can see that there is a placard on the left wing, but you can't read it. And the right wing appears not to have any type of placard at all. This is another item that should be checked on the annual inspection as a required items for placards, and another indication that the airplane was not flown in an airworthy condition. Right, this view is taken from a ladder that's in front of the airplane, showing the top of both of my tanks. One of the things that if you're down and you're a short person, you cannot see the top of the wings and those fuel caps. So I always make a point of walking around the back, looking up there, making sure I have replaced those caps on top of the fuel filler necks. And that's something that you should do prior to every departure. This view of the accident airplane was one of the first indications I had a eureka moment that this was a metallized airplane. I was looking at the back here, noticing all the scrape marks, and saw the seam running along the fuselage from the lap joints of the aluminum. And on the metallized pacers, it gives the top of the fuselage a more rounded appearance than it does for the fabric-covered ones. Looking at the damage on the left elevator, you can see the scrape marks that have exposed the blue paint that's underneath. So just another indication that this airplane was the Piper blue at one time. The far left picture shows the jack screw trim for the accident airplane. One of the things I noticed looking at this was how dry the Acme threads were on that jack screw. The two pictures on the right show my jack screw in the full trim up and down positions. You can see there's a lot of grease in the threads and along the entire pulley length of that. The one on the left of the accident airplane, it looks to me like that had not been properly greased in quite some time. What grease is there is very dry and hard, waxy at the bottom along the trim pulley, and the screws themselves look bare and dry, and I don't see any evidence of any grease in the threads and the trim saddle. So another indication that the airplane was probably not in an airworthy condition.
Thank you, Carrie, for taking time out of your busy day and sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. Stay tuned for Episode 6, Arizona Law. Could the state of Arizona have brought charges against Anderson for the death of Heidi Sue Dowland? Could her family have sued Anderson in civil court using tort law for the wrongful death of their daughter, sister, and mother, Heidi?